What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 Mini Cooper S. Today on the Mini behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace rear wheel bearings. This will be applicable to all your R56s from 2006 all the way to 2015. In front of us, we have one of the kits available on fcpro.com, which includes of NTN bearings with the hardware needed to install them. We've also added some fresh Ryan lug bolts as we have new hubs. We're going to have the opportunity to put in new lug bolts and torque those down to spec. Everything will be nice and fresh. Typically, this will last anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles. That's not to say they can't fail earlier and or last longer. I've seen wheel bearings last up to 200,000 miles. It truly depends on the kind of driving your vehicle does. If you couldn't tell already, the Mini behind us lives a rock and roll lifestyle. While it has low mileage, it is certainly driven hard, so it is due from some wheel bearings. Some things to look out for are just the noise while you're driving the vehicle. As they start to fail, you'll hear a whirring coming from that corner of the wheel. It might even turn into like a whoop, 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 whoop noise. It almost sounds like you're driving on uneven roads. Sometimes that can be tires, sometimes that can be other suspension components, but usually you're pretty able to tell once the wheel bearing starts failing. You always want to replace these in pairs because if one side's starting to go, the second side is going to follow shortly behind. So that's why we recommend doing both at the same time. But before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. And for this DIY, you're going to need a torque wrench. We have two here, both a 1/2-inch drive and 3/8 drive, one for our lug bolts and one for the hardware on the bearing. We have a 17mm socket for those lug bolts, a small 2-inch extension, 16mm deep socket, T50, a caliper hanger hook. You can also use bungee cords or zip ties, whatever you have hanging around. We have a 3/8 drive ratchet, a paint pen, and then some penetrating fluid, our favorite liquid moly ceramic paste, some electric hand tools to make this job a little bit easier. With that said, let's go ahead and get started on this Mini DIY. All right, my good people, today we're going to be focusing on the rear passenger side of the R56. However, the steps are going to be identical for both sides. Now, this car being front-wheel drive makes this job a lot easier for us today. So with that, the first thing is going to be removing our wheel. We're up in the air already. We're using an impact to remove the wheel. For those of you using a traditional breaker bar, break the lug bolts free while the car's on the ground. Then you can jack it up and remove them the rest of the way. Now, our car is equipped with some different hardware as it is a race car. But traditionally, you have 4 17mm lug bolts that you're going to want to zap off. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that. Now, our car is equipped with studs, so the wheel isn't going to fall on us. However, for those of you following along at home, you would want to brace the wheel as you remove the last lug to keep it from falling on you. Now we have our wheel off. We have a better view of where we're going to be working. We have our brake disc in the way, which we're going to have to remove, which means the caliper has to come off. So before I do anything, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that this rotor set screw is going to come off, because if that can't come off, then we can't do any of this job. So with that, we'll grab our Torx, make sure we can break that loose, and then we'll move on to removing the rear caliper. So we have a T50 that we're going to use to break our set screw free. If you need to, hit it with some penetrating fluid ahead of time. This car doesn't really see any winter as it hibernates in that time of year, so I think we'll be okay. Make sure your T50 is in all the way. Now I'm using an extension because I have wheel studs in my way, but we'll just go ahead and work on breaking that free. Perfect. I'm not going to take it off all the way just yet. I just want to make sure that's going to come off. From there, we're going to swap over to our 16mm socket. We're going to take off the caliper carrier and the caliper itself as one piece, and we're just going to hang it off to the side. That way we don't have to separate everything. It'll be nice and easy. So with that, let's get our caliper hook, hop in the back, and get ready to hang it. So we have our two 16mm bolts that hold our whole assembly to the rear trailing arm here. So we're just going to go ahead and pull these out. Just have a 16 with a 2-inch extension. And I'm just going to zap them out with the electric ratchet. Speed things up a bit. All right, and with that out, we can pull our assembly off to the side. And I'm just going to use a hook to hang it off of our upper control arm. There's not a lot of play in these rear brakes. Usually the cables or the parking brake cable kind of takes up a lot of the slack. The soft line doesn't really droop too much. So we're just going to hang it on top of the trailing arm, use the hook to keep it from falling on us. So now we're going to take our T50 and remove our set screw the rest of the way. Again, be mindful if you're working in the garage at home. You obviously are probably not going to have studs. This can fall at any moment. It's not a big disc, but it can still hurt you. So just be ready to catch it. And now we can take this off and set our brake disc to the side. And now with that, we have our brake disc off. We have a clear view of our hub. One thing you can do is you can see the ends of the threads of the 16mm bolts poking through. Take a little wire brush if they're rusty, clean them up, spray a little bit of penetrating fluid on them. That's going to make the removal of these a lot easier. So we're going to do that just now, and then we'll pick it back up with pulling the bolts out. Now with our threads cleaned up a little bit and a little bit of penetrating fluid on them, we can hop out over in the back and work at those 4 16mm bolts so we can get this hub off. So we have 4 16mm bolts. I'm just going to go ahead and break them free first. Now you'll notice we're keeping our speed sensor in place. Not really going to hurt anything by keeping it in there, but if you're concerned about hurting the sensor, you do have a small 8mm bolt there to remove. If it gets in our way, we'll pull it out. But otherwise, we should be good to rock and roll. Right now, I'm just going to break them all free, make sure that they will all come off. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and zap them out. Be mindful that the hub may want to fall, so you want to be prepared for that. Don't let it hit your toes. And it literally just removed itself. Super pleasing to work on these cars like this when you're doing these type of jobs. Now we're just going to take a moment, gently clean here. There's really no corrosion to take care of. We'll make sure these edges are nice and smooth for our new bearing. Being mindful of our sensor, we don't want to hit this with a brush or anything like that. That's the main reason why you would want to take that off. If you suspect that this is super contaminated or anything like that. They do have an opening here which allows for any debris to kind of eject itself, but at the same time allows for debris to get in. So, you know, it is what it is. We'll clean this up, and we'll pick it back up with mating our new hub to the trailing arm and getting the bolt started. Now with our trailing arm nice and clean, we have our new wheel bearing. They only go on one way. They have a little dip at the top that goes right here. Matches up with this. The opening is matching with the flat bottom, or this slightly curved bottom. It's kind of like Patrick's star. We're gonna go ahead and just place it on. Super gentle. We'll grab one of our new 16mm bolts. And we're just gonna reach from the back, get one of these started, and that'll keep the hub from falling on us, and then we can get the other 3 started. All right. And once we get all 3 16mm bolts in, we're going to torque all of those down to 56 Newton meters. It's not a whole lot. So as you remember, they came out pretty easy. So they're just nice and snug in there. No need to gorilla them on. With all 4 hands started, we're going to snug them up using the electric ratchet. We're going to tighten these down to 56 Newton meters. I like to do these in a crisscross pattern, kind of like the way you do your wheels. All right, and now with them all torqued down, we're just going to hit them with the paint pen to show that we've torqued them. Keep an eye on them. That way, next time Ben checks his car at the track or off the track, we can make sure nothing here has moved. Now we have our new hub installed, my good people. The next step is going to be to reinstall our brakes. Now Zimmerman doesn't really require any coating on their discs since they are zinc coated. We are in New England. It is inevitable that things are going to rust. So we're going to apply a little bit of zinc coating to the hub here, get our disc on and our set screw. So let's do that now. Now we can grab our brake disc. And I like to put a little bit of paste where the set screw seats as well. This is totally overkill, but I'm scarred. Now we'll get our T50, and I like to just start these by hand, especially on a nice new hub. The last thing you want to do is strip the threads. So I'm gonna zap it in gently. But for those of you playing along, 27 Newton meters for the T50. And then I personally like to encapsulate them just to help keep that moisture out. Now with that, we're going to swing over our caliper and carrier assembly. For those of you splitting these, the torque spec for the guide pin bolts are 35 Newton meters. We didn't take ours apart, but I didn't want to leave those of you looking for that hanging. So now let's just swing this over. All that good stuff back in place. We're going to take our 16 millimeter bolts once more, get these started by hand. You might have to adjust up and down so you find the hole for the carrier bracket. Okay, got the top one started. Now we can start the bottom one. Again, always start these by hand. All right, and now with both of them started, we're just going to snug them up, and then we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 65 Newton meters. And there's the bottom one. And if you can get it in there, you can go ahead and paint mark them. All right, my good people, now at this point we have our hub on, we have our brake disc on, we have our brakes, everything's good to rock and roll. All that's left to do is get our wheel on, so let's do that now. You gotta line up our lug holes. Then always start your lug bolts by hand, especially after completing a job like this. The last thing you wanna do is strip out the threads on your brand new hub, and then you can't even go for a test drive. Now, these are not gonna stay on this car permanently. This car is gonna be swapped back over to studs, but for the purpose of this video, we're just gonna put these on just to give you the right visualization. And then we'll be popping them right back off. Using the impact, we're just gonna snug them up in a crisscross pattern, no more than 30 Newton meters. So at this point, good people, this would be where we would drop the car back on the ground and give these lug bolts a final torque. Now this car is going to go back to studs as it is a race car, so we're not going to bother with these. These wheels are a little bit marred up from the wrong lugs being on here, so we're not going to do any further damage. But should the car be back on the ground, we're going to torque these down to 90 Newton meters in a crisscross pattern, just like we did the hub. And overall, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. A very straightforward and easy job on the R56 chassis. Definitely a driveway friendly job. You definitely do not need a lift to do this DIY. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, or there's a specific DIY you're looking for on the R56 chassis, drop that in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.